Morning, everyone. I'm Peter Murray, Curator-in-Chief at NLA, and welcome to this event presenting the latest thinking and development in the fast-changing industrial and logistics sector. Now, UK logistics supports some 2.6 million jobs, and rising demand could also create job opportunities for local people right across London. And this thriving sector presents an opportunity to support the capital's economic recovery by delivering jobs, protecting the environment, and ensuring new homes have access to the services they need. And this event forms part of the NLA Industrial and Logistics Programme, which is supported by Orchid Swankie, Prologis and Turley. And we're delighted to have them all here today to tell us more about their work. So there's a quick reminder, as usual, there'll be a chance to ask our speakers some questions at the end using the Q&A button on your screen. So I'm very pleased to welcome our first speaker. Sitting inside a large warehouse is Martin Cooper. He's Vice President, Project Management and Prologis. So he's going to describe how the firm operates here and around the world. So Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much. So next slide, please, Kat. And the next slide again. So welcome, everybody. My name is Martin Cooper. I work as a project manager for Prologis UK, and I'm also part of our UK sustainability team. And today I'm here to talk to you about the role of last mile logistics facilities in building sustainable local communities in London. Next slide, please. So it's safe to say that COVID-19 has changed the way people view the logistics sector. In fact, a recent Pulse survey conducted earlier this year showed that around 55% of residents living in London agreed that local councils should allocate areas for last mile warehousing. So you can see there, you've got the strongly agrees and the somewhat agrees at the top. Compare this to pre-pandemic research, which showed that only 40% of residents supported further logistics development. And that's quite a jump and gives quite a mandate. The next slide, please. However, there are many common perceptions around industrial warehousing. And over the years, Prologis and the industry have worked hard with our customers and the communities where we're based to show that they're an important and sustainable contributor to the local, national, and global economy. Next slide, please. Sadly, however, misconceptions still exist. And amongst these are the belief that last mile logistics facilities are unsustainable and create very few jobs. So in some people's minds, the solution is to push logistics and warehousing outside the capital and essentially push away the perceived problem. However, last mile logistics facilities do create local sustainable jobs. Indeed, our own research shows that logistics buildings create one job for every 69 meters squared of floor space, which for a city like London, with an unemployment rate of around 6.4%, has to be good news. I'm going to show an animation next, which some of you may have seen on our LinkedIn feed and our website. But as the animation shows, recent research from the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, actually shows that if you locate last mile facilities closer to where people live and work, you make them more suitable for electric vehicles, and you also save on distribution and packaging, which reduce both air pollution and noise. So if you'd like to go to the next slide, that will play the animation. at. So CBRE data suggests that for every £1 billion spent by British consumers online, an additional 900,000 square foot of logistics space is needed. Of course, not all of this can happen within cities like London, but increasing demand leads to an increased need for last mile logistics. And London's problems are not unique. My Japanese colleagues have been battling with the scarcity of industrial land for over a decade, and their answer, as you can see here, has been to go up instead of out or down, which is being explored in some cities. Recently, Prologis has also built a multi-story logistics facility in downtown Georgetown, Seattle, in the USA. And you can see here, the challenge is getting the vehicles up and out, but it's entirely possible to do. Next slide, please. So, are multi-story warehouses the answer? Maybe, I would say, but not always. However, having considered the issues, we're left with three key takeaways. The first is that Prologis research suggests there's an appetite from consumers for last mile solutions, far more so now than pre-COVID-19 pandemic. Secondly, further independent research indicates that logistics, real estate and e-commerce lower the carbon footprint of retail, and that urban fulfillment centres have the potential to reduce this even further. And finally, our global experience shows that there are technical solutions to scarcity of space, such as multi-story or mixed use. Last slide, please. So, a call to arms. In order to solve the problem of urban logistics, it's now essential that all stakeholders, be they developers, occupiers, local communities, local councils, planners, and most importantly, central government, work together to enable the delivery of local, sustainable, net zero facilities that deliver benefit for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very interesting to see really how COVID has actually accelerated changing ideas about local delivery patterns and move towards greater consolidation as well, which I think is one of the positives to come out of the dreadful situation we've been in for the last 18 months or so. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Tom Alexander, who's a director at Orchid Swankie, and he's long been studying the hybrid and multi-level industrial solutions, and he's going to tell us a bit about his work. Tom.
Thanks very much, Peter. Good to see you all this morning. That's the beginning. Don't worry, I'm not going to show all of these slides. It looks like there's a lot here. Yeah, I'm a director. As a team, actually, we've been working on this for quite a long time. But very quickly, we do have a new website. You can see a lot of the work that we've been doing on that new website, so please do have a browse. But we kind of explored the industrial sector quite a number of years ago, 10 years ago actually. We were invited to refresh it, and the things we found most interesting were how it was not integrated with urban situations, with other uses, with other people's activities. So we were trying to open that up more. They're brilliant, amazing things inside. We do a lot of research, and we've recently been looking at shopping centres and how they might be part of the last mile or logistics message or part of the system, the infrastructure across London. So there are big anchor stores which are not working anymore. So we were looking at that. We found that looking at industrial buildings influenced the way we designed offices, which had much more volume in them. We realized that if we were going to add residential to them, they needed to be a bit more systematic. There's a lot of changes to columns and risers and windows as the market changes, but we needed to have something more consistent with a hybrid mix. Purely industrial, we've done quite a lot of buildings, some fascinating stuff for blades, for beer, very green roofs on them, and even for retail environments, essentially what are in sheds. But we kind of refreshed the industrial building to something we call a mid-tech, sort of a mid-technology, which can accommodate the evolving market, much more sophisticated, and can be many things. And also looking at old industrial buildings to see how they can transform, which is important when you're thinking about hybrids, because If you have resi above it or integrated with it, that's going to be there for maybe 100 years. So what's going to happen in the big volume below it? And the answer is many things. They're fantastic biospheres. So they can integrate in the city well. So I'm just going to show you quickly a few of the projects we've been doing recently, which is just examples of intensification in and around London. This is on railway sidings, and it shows how, a bit like the Prologis model, if you go up a level or maybe even more, you can get multi-level over existing sidings, for example, and integrate other uses around the edges. Public realm is really important to all of that, of course. This is a bus depot showing how you can put a 100,000 square foot logistics building on top with all the right entrances and exits quite easily. This is multi-level industrial, not using a ramp, but using goods lifts. It's a model which is being explored, still open to question, but it's not. It's sort of B2 class really, and E class, not necessarily B8. But then how that expands into master plans. We've been looking at existing buildings, how these are logistics buildings, and how you can expand them, which is more traditional in a way, but it's an interesting model. We've been looking at what happens if you go down into the ground in one particular project. And so there's a sort of 10-meter clear industrial volume below ground, but with a park on top. Absolutely public amenity, public realm. Really exciting, this one coming up hopefully during this year. We've been looking at just on the edge of London business parks and how industrial can mix with other uses, in this case education or the film industry or healthcare. Life sciences is such a big hot topic at the moment, and they really can. It's the communities, the people in industrial are doing extraordinary things, and they are part of our community, so they deserve great public realms, shooting areas, green areas, swimming areas, whatever it is. Just a great space. So this is kind of edge of London, if you like. That's led us to do some very big projects as well. This is an infrastructure project about hydro port, so little turbines that turn through the tidal movements and generate enough power for a whole industrial estate, but also a super port. Not directly London, but maybe on the estuary, a bit further out where it's tidal. The hybrids itself, this is a model some of you may have seen. We've presented this before, but it's just our approach has always been no compromise to the industrial, no compromise to the residential, and you need some infrastructure in between, a kind of a transfer zone. And public realm is absolutely key to all of it. So we took our ideas of mid-tech, mixing that with best-in-class residential and fantastic public realm, and blending those communities together is what starts to make it work. So I'm going to whistle through some examples. This is one of the first ones we ever did with Segro, actually, where the roof of the industrial becomes public realm for the people who live and work above it. And we always designed them as chassis, so they were not prescriptive about what the use was. It could be resi, but it could be other things. We made a big play on the emphasis of public realm when we were designing these things. 100,000 square foot replaced, 800 residential units added, but public realm, pocket park, tennis, and ground and first floor levels critical to making that work with the industrial. Just some views of that, but the industrial has to be, as I say, no compromise. 10-meter clear heights, proper yards, loading bays, and big clear spaces on the inside. Many examples we've done. Looked at about 40 across London, with many different ownership types and models and development partnerships going on. This is just a small one, but it packs in a lot of industrial and residential. And we've been looking at the best ways of doing that with some brilliant specialists, people like Eckersley O'Callaghan. Embodied carbon tests. If we integrate a residential block with an industrial, and we try not to put it too much on top these days, we're doing it more integrated. What's the best material to do it? Steel, concrete, timber, combinations of, and we get a sort of a total embodied carbon number at the end of it. So we're exploring that. And to be honest, each model is different, and as we go through changing markets, that changes all the time. So, sorry, yeah, quickly, some more examples. We're doing a wharf building where one barge takes 24 lorries off the road for a logistics building and puts them through a wharf at ground level, which is protected, into little E-vans, and then it has resi on top. So you start to get these extraordinary kind of sectional combinations of buildings with river and road and garden and living, but proper big industrial spaces on the inside, and then great gardens on the top. So you get a front which shares residential entrance with an industrial facade, a warehouse facade, and a back which is onto the river. But there's no compromise again, as we can say. Another scheme we're doing in northeast London, where we're exploring the face, the windows on work to the industrial part, And then the yard has got an enclosed space. So it has an in and out, but doors which can close it. So all of the acoustics and pollution issues are resolved. But e-vehicles are changing so much as well. But then inside big industrial spaces, METS needs lots of flexibility. So rapidly speeding up, just examples. This is Baltic Wharf. We looked at many examples for that before it was sold. Very complicated site, but really interesting. Side-by-side, multi-level industrial on a residential campus. Again, everything working as it should do. Smaller scale, this one actually is going to be life sciences on top of industrial, which is the blend that's quite popular now in certain areas. Existing logistics people, again, just showing how you can do multi-level and complex sites, but make them something special. And existing buildings as well, one that Prologists know well, in fact, which is, we did a study for that at the beginning. So that's a whistle-stop tour of where we've been going recently. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. I'll just remind everyone in the audience that if you've got any questions after the presentations, do put them in the Q&A button, and we'll come back to them later. But now we have our last speaker for this morning, Kat Fraser. She's Planning Director at Turley, and she's going to tell us more about co-location and planning for industrial uses. So Kat, over to you.
That's perfect, thank you. Yeah, Kat Fraser, I'm a planning director in our Turley London team. And yes, as Peter said, we're doing quite a few co-location schemes at the moment, and increasingly a lot more industrial from last year. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So echoing Martin's comments, when you reflect on the last 18 months, both with the uncertainty of Brexit and the pandemic, you don't immediately think of the positives. But for this particular sector, what has happened is an acceleration in innovation and tech, and in turn put a spotlight on the industrial and logistics sector. So 2020 witnessed a record-breaking take-up of industrial logistics, and that followed the surge in online retailing with that linked shift from just-in-time supply to just-in-case supply. Next slide, please. So it created a massive opportunity for businesses and job creation across the UK. And the value of logistics in this sector was truly exemplified. And as you can see here, the stats are quite compelling. So while other sectors in the built environment stalled or paused for thought, like office and alternative resi market, industrial and logistics soared. And with that, the growth in numbers and employees and business. So with that, it is now a significant part of the UK's building stock, and so it follows that this sector is going to be a big contribution to the green economic recovery. And we're seeing that now with a new generation of green facilities emerging in the UK and London. Next slide, please. So this didn't just happen overnight. This development follows nearly a decade of year-on-year growth in this sector, and that's set to continue for 2021. In fact, equaling the take-up, if not more, in 2020. And so now we are at a tipping point, and what we really need is planning and policy to catch up with this market need. So the biggest constraint we are seeing facing the sector is that scarcity of suitable and available land, especially for big box requirements and last mile urban logistics. Next slide, please. So what does the policy say? What do we have to work with? Here's a quick snapshot of what the newly adopted London plan sets out. So although we've got protection and intensification still being an important thread running through the industrial policies in the new London plan. A key and somewhat controversial move was made by the then Secretary of State just before the adoption to remove the element of the industrial policies which sought a no net loss of industrial land when seeking redevelopment, or as we'll come on to, co-location of uses. So this move was intended to provide flexibility for its managed release to other planning priorities, such as housing, schools, infrastructure. And what this did was send a clear message that the government is prioritising housing over industry. Another key policy which also created an interesting debate is the ability to intensify, consolidate, to be able to co-locate uses with industrial or non-designated and designated land, but we'll come on to this more in a minute. Next slide, please. So here we are, we've got an adopted London plan a prioritisation of housing alongside a scarcity of land for this sector. So how do we fix this and ensure that industrial logistics can grow in the way that it needs to? Well, a key part of that will be the local plan process, and it's critical that the right land in the right places are allocated for this development. So what this infographic shows is roughly where the London boroughs are in their local plan preparation process, and in turn where that opportunity is, immediate opportunity is for developers, investors, operators and designers to work with local planning authorities to either solidify allocations or create new site allocations that include the right space in sustainable locations for industrial and logistical needs. Interestingly, as you can see here, the central boroughs that are the red and amber have either got newly adopted or nearing adoption in their local plan process. So little room to manoeuvre at this point, but then for these areas, especially in regards to things like last mile urban logistics, it will be more about a need for a more forward-thinking approach to start mixing this operation alongside other uses, potentially in town centres, say. With other large swathes of green across London, there's a real opportunity for public and private sectors to work together to ensure that we can make these new site allocations. Next slide, please. So where do we think these areas will be? With the scarcity of land that we've discussed, there does need to be innovative ways to deal with this requirement. Designated land within sustainable locations near to strategic road networks will still be king for big box requirements and manufacturing. Struggling out of town retail parks, as we've heard, can also present worthwhile locations for investors and developers alike. In addition to this, quick fix solutions to provide essential last mile hubs are becoming increasingly attractive to occupiers, especially in town centres. What is clear though, is that we need to make sure we get this right, and there's a clear need for up-to-date employment needs assessment and land reviews to consider these needs of existing emerging industries. And this in turn could lead to things like land swaps, which are something we can do just now, to ensure that land is being given over to other uses and new sites being identified in more suitable locations maybe. What could ultimately ensure, however, that we build back better and complement the local plan process could be the introduction of an employment land delivery test, similar to that of the housing delivery test. This has been talked about through the BPF manifesto earlier this year, as well as Tarley's own research and recommendations earlier this year. So next slide, please. So now we talked a lot about the importance of industrial logistics and the place it holds in the market, especially in regards to contributing to the green economic recovery. And what we've also noted is that the government's overriding priority is housing. However, what is clear and touched on within the recent white paper for planning reform is that housing cannot be treated in isolation from other sectors, and that does include the industrial logistics sector. Next slide, please. So what we've learned over the last 18 months, the rise of logistics, is that for every new home, there is a demand for roughly 73 square foot of industrial warehousing, which equates to a requirement of approximately 22 million square foot of the stuff just in 1 year. So taking into account the demand for high density residential and the land available within the M25, the public and private sector will need to work together to find innovative and master plan solutions. So could this in part be through co-location as envisaged by the London Plan? Could that be the answer? Next slide, please. So co-location is not a new concept and has been a policy throughout the various stages of the new London Plan. It is, however, now an adopted policy that provides a potential answer to that housing shortfall and potentially impending industrial logistics crisis in London anyway. Next slide, please. So over the last couple of years, Tarley has been tracking co-location schemes that have been going through the planning system in London. And this research concluded at this point that we're showing you now on the 31st of August, and we've got some interesting findings. So firstly, what may be surprising to see is over half of London boroughs have received and approved co-location applications. So there is an appetite, it seems, that planners can get on board with. I think we saw it from Tom's presentation as well. So next slide, please. And interestingly, for the most part, there is an uplift. From the research we've conducted, there has been a total of approximately 157,000 square metres of new industrial floor space through these schemes, all through co-location. So that is alongside a figure of 16,000 new homes approved. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. I feel like I'm running out of time, but I just wanted to end on these three graphs. Interesting to see affordable housing provision is good. You'll note that it is roughly around the 35% mark, which shows that the majority of industrial co-location sites are not experiencing a net loss of industrial capacity, despite that London plan policy. Otherwise, we'd be seeing a lot more of 50% provision mark. That would be a bit higher. You can also see that affordable workspace is now being applied more regularly, which is a positive. And another interesting statistic that has come out is the nature of the industrial floor space being provided in these schemes. And as expected, it's more in the old B1C, now Class E, and B8 category, as that's easier to co-locate with those more sensitive residential uses. So it's not perfect. There's still a place for independent designated industrial sites that can deal with heavier B2 industrial use. But from a planning and policy perspective, it does seem to be working. So what we need to watch out for now is the delivery of these schemes and how they work in practice. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Kat. And now we've got a bit of time for questions. I'll bring our panel together to answer your queries, and we've got some in the Q&A panel already, so please do put your questions into there and we'll follow them up. I was going to ask a question about car parks, but I see Martin Wedderburn has also got one here. So redundant car parking structures could be a useful source of space for last mile consolidation centres, but issues such as low ceiling heights mean that this is not always easy. Do the panelists know of good retrofit examples where such issues have been overcome? And I think that's interesting in the context of British Land announcing that they'd bought the underground car park in Finsbury Square next to the City of London. I mean, it's in Islington, which I see has got, it's yellow on the local plan map at the moment. So I don't know how British Land will get on with planning there, but so can we go through each of you and discuss redundant car parks? Martin, let's start with you. Have you bought any redundant car parks recently?
No, we haven't, Peter. And I think the person who's posed the question raises one of the key constraints, which is the low ceiling height. So I'm not answering from a position of experience. I can see the opportunity. I wonder if Tom's got something to say on this. Having larger vans decanting into smaller electric vehicles, for example, would actually be a perfect use of an old car park space, and it's far better than them doing it in the street, isn't it? Which often happens now. Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, no, interesting one. I think if they're concrete, they've got all that embodied carbon that we should try and rescue or retain, as it were. And some other, I know the one in Finsbury Square and also others in London, there's been lots of ideas for them. Logistics industrial, I think the main thing is the height. So you would have to find a place for the bigger trucks to come in and offload, and then you could have a whole fleet of smaller vehicles in there, which makes sense. And the e-vehicles, cargo bikes, vans would certainly work in those spaces. And I think 100 Bishopsgate had a consolidation centre that they use at night. So the idea of a car park being somewhere that HGVs visited at night and then you distributed during the day would make sense, something like Finsbury Square, so it doesn't clash with all our daytime living activities. So potential, yes.
Great. And Kat, have you got any of these on your register of clients who are looking at changing use of car parks?
We've not specifically dealt with it for this sector, but redundant car parks have been a popular, form to develop into things. And I know that the Barbican, I think it was Amazon, have recently started using the Barbican car park for last mile logistics. And I think it's the location of them that's really interesting. And, I'll leave the designers and the operators to say about the low ceiling heights, but it's a good use of space in populated areas where you could definitely get that low carbon offset.
Yes, well, as Tom says, probably cargo bikes would work, but maybe logistics companies need to redesign their vehicles, so they're just lower lorries, perhaps. Let's go to the questions again. Anna Sinnott, who is at Be First, says, given multi-level industrial isn't always appropriate, is there a limit to the demand for multi-level industrial in London? And of course, Be First is out at Barking and Dagenham, which has one of the largest areas of industrial space in London for sure. Tom, do you have any thoughts on that?
Multi-level has been discussed for a long time, and some of the big clients we've been working with, Prologis have looked at it. They've shown you examples in Japan today. I think there's always a question of does it work properly? So the ramp has to be at least 12 meters wide. So if anything gets stuck on it, you can get past it easily going up or down. And I think if you make it very easy and obvious, in a way, it's like our approach, no compromise to the space, getting to it. And then once you're there, the loadings on the floors are appropriate to your business. And some of those loadings can be incredibly high, so up to 30 kilonewtons per meter squared. So it's really just making sure it's appropriate. But in a tight city, we've looked at, the ones we were looking at are railway sidings, which is sort of multi-level. We've had people say they'd take that, before while it was still a concept. So there's it seems to be a demand for the space, and that's what drives the multi-level, as Kat has said as well. So I think it's possible, but it is sort of market driven, and you do have to test it before you go ahead and build it. But I think the infrastructure of London is changing through our demands for these spaces. And I wrote a piece recently about this, because there's kind of circular tension between London needs these spaces, but can we live with them? And we know we want them. We know we want them centrally, because there's a huge demand. But are they appropriate, and do they work with living accommodation with the public realm? And I think they do. I absolutely believe they can do, and they will do. And so multi-level is one way of going forwards with that. But like many of the challenges of co-location, perceptions are one thing, and the reality is another. You just have to work through the issues, and gradually this will become more normal, I think.
Thanks. Either Kat or Martin have any comment about demand and whether there is the demand for a large amount of this? No? Yeah, Martin.
I'll do very quickly. I think there is tremendous demand. The challenge, as I said at the moment, is matching the demand with the opportunity and negotiating the planning process and the technical side of it. Tom mentioned he looked at multiple schemes across London. I think the current challenge is making it stick and finding the sites that create the opportunity. But I truly believe that we will see more of these schemes coming forward.
And Kat, we've got a question here from Patrick, who says, asks about, are they comfortable with the potential clash in needs of residents and 24-hour industry? And that's one I want to come to Martin to first. But I'm just wondering, in terms of the sorts of development clients that you're dealing with. I can remember Tony Pidgley saying that he'd never put housing, and he's happy to put it on the same site, but not one on top of each other. I mean, how do you find your clients responding to this? Are they more positive than Tony Pidgley used to be about that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of positivity around co-locating these uses. We're working with a couple of developer and investors on such schemes where we are stacking on top of residential. So there is an appetite. From that policy perspective, we're working very closely, and these applications are being scrutinised heavily by the local authorities and the GLA in terms of that agent of change principle and those environmental factors. I think just one of the main things we are seeing, though, it's what sort of industrial will work on those sites. And as I touched on it at the end of the presentation, it is that softer industrial that we're seeing working at the moment. So that old B1C, those creative type industrial uses, as well as perhaps the B8, more of the storage and distribution. It will be interesting to see if that could ever move to anything further, more of the B2 type uses. But I think it's definitely here to stay, and it will just be interesting to see the delivery of these applications as they're going through the system.
So while I've got you on, perhaps I could ask you, because you mentioned the changes to planning acts, and that clearly is a matter of some debate and uncertainty at the moment. Yet clearly a lot of local authorities have been thinking quite a lot about all sorts of things around design codes and how they're going to have to change things going forward. But now that all seems up in the mix. What's that going to do to the planning system? I mean, we've talked about how tricky it is at the moment anyway, getting this sort of stuff to happen. But is this going to create greater holdups, do you think? The fact that nobody quite knows at the moment where the planning system's going, whether it's going to change at all even?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. There's definitely going to be a further delay after our recent shake-up with Gove and Genric. And I think where we were with the planning reforms, there was already uncertainty about when we would get a new planning bill after the white paper. I think what's quite safe to say is that there will be a further delay. But with that, I think especially in London, is that we do have a London plan, and I think you do need to separate from thinking about that uncertain future that we've got at the moment, that I don't think we really know where that's going in terms of timings, and concentrate on what we do have. And we do have a framework and a policy environment to work within. I think what will be is very required for industrial logistics is just making sure we keep putting this sector on their mandate and getting the recognition it deserves with housing delivery for those next steps wherever they go with the government.
Thank you very much. Martin, perhaps we could go back to Patrick's question about co-location working, and how comfortable are you with the potential clash between residents and a 24-hour industry? And Tom talked about, the quality of the housing needs to be the same, but those relationships between the two are potential causes of issues, aren't they?
Yes, Peter, and actually they're potential causes of conflict or issues, as you say, on any industrial scheme. So it's something we're used to dealing with when we build our distribution centres. For example, we've recently built a very successful scheme in Hemel Hempstead, which is very close to residential. We had initial opposition. We worked with the residents. We addressed potential noise paths, and now actually the overall noise environment there has reduced. The potential for noise and 24-hour working is a real issue, though. The things to consider are, the intrusive noise like slamming doors or engines starting and the like. Tom showed some examples of enclosed yards where you bring your vehicles in, you shut the door, you deal with everything you need to, and then you let them out again, which is one possible solution. We're also excited to see the development of electric vehicles. That provided they can charge from the grid and not off a diesel generator like some people are doing, that gives you a great solution to potential emissions. They're also quieter. So going back to the question, yes, we see there are issues. We're confident that we can address those, not only to the satisfaction of the planners and the EHOs, but to the communities that we work in. Prologis takes a long-term view of the property we own and develop. We want to be good neighbours, and our aim as we move forward into these last mile facilities will be to continue to do that.
Great, thank you very much. Now we've got a couple of questions from Francis Mayer, or AKA Francis Wheat. The first one is, how does the panel think last mile logistics can assist vitality and viability of the high street? Interesting one. And also saying, what consideration, if any, is being given to drone delivery or the potential for it? So let's go around each of you and answer either both or one of those. So Tom, can we start with you? Viability of the high street, or what about drones?
Yeah, the high street, we sort of showed an example we've been looking at. We've been looking at a number of shopping centres on high streets in very urban situations, and the pain they've been going through well before the pandemic is evident as you walk into them. So I think refreshing those, finding other uses for them is great. They're cultural hubs in little sort of parts of the city or cities. So you've got to make them, activate them, and one thing is last mile logistics. One part of that, as I mentioned, we were looking at taking the anchor store, which is certainly one of the ones that suffered, some of the larger stores in shopping centres, and suggesting that could be fulfillment centre or last mile logistics. It's a transfer zone from one vehicle to another, and if you can do that well, then it's great. There are many other things you can do with shopping centres. I think the high street in general is smaller units, so it's less directly usable. Martin probably has a better view on that. They're just smaller spaces, but certainly the shopping centre is an opportunity. I think drones, we're so fascinated by the whole e-mobility picture as it grows almost weekly. Technology is so fast that I think it's possible. It may happen. Certainly we've been drawing drones inside industrial buildings so they can work in that space and help the operation or help different functions inside the space. I think if it goes around the city, there are many questions about privacy and all sorts of, and flight paths and all sorts of things. So interesting, could happen.
Yeah, if I add on the drones, I think the answer is not yet. Like many market leaders and operators, Prologis is looking into this in America. We've got a bit of the business called Prologis Ventures, and there we're looking at what's next in warehouse technology. I think our take on it at the moment is it may happen. Certainly it's a possibility in the future, but there are, as Tom hinted, there are so many things and hurdles to get over before it's a realistic solution. I think a much better solution for us is electric vehicles, cargo bikes, all of these things that we're seeing starting to take hold in London, with, say, Hermes and their fleet of electric delivery vehicles. That's the way forward in the short term, before we get to the Blade Runner style channels in the sky of drones delivering everything.
And are you seeing a lot of growth in use of cargo bikes? I mean, I see some around the streets, but I wouldn't have said it was massive.
Well, it is happening, and we're sort of veering off my work subject matter, but into an area of personal interest. I think with the recent improvements in cycling infrastructure in London, nothing like what we've seen in, say, Paris, which has really gone for it, then cargo bikes could actually make a real impact. but that's a central government, that is a government-led thing that has to happen.
Thanks. And Kat, high streets and drones, what are your thoughts on those two?
Drones still seem far too futuristic for me, but I can comment on the high street. Yeah, I think that it's been well publicized that we've got struggling high streets, and we actually do quite a lot of work with the smaller operators, quite a lot through the Arch Company, actually, which, as you can imagine, in London, there's lots of arches in those densely town centre areas. And yeah, it's popular. It's helping bring activation back to those areas. And yeah, in terms of, I suppose, the green economic side of it, we've seen a lot of pledges made by big operators as well. So like ASOS, they've got DPDs installed on all electric parcel depot in Westminster last year, which was very central, and now has a fleet of electric vans doing what they need. So it can work well in town centres, and I think with that sustainable side to it, I think it will be quite successful with smaller operators.
Thanks. Now we have an interesting, rather detailed question here. What type of heating and cooling technology is required for these sites in order to achieve net zero? So, Tom, that must be something you've been giving a lot of thought to.
Thanks for that one, Peter. Interesting question from Anonymous. Obviously, this is there are great opportunities with co-location because you may have some heat generated within the employment part of it that could then you could benefit and use that in some way with the residential part. That's something we've been exploring, and that's all a big contribution to net zero. I think you've got to sort of manage the air and the heat and the work environment for the industrial, as well as if you're designing an office space now. It's got to be fantastic for the well-being of the people who are in there. So all of those considerations come into it. So we really approach the whole thing as if it were any other building type. That's a given. The exact typology, the exact systems, they have been varying with different consultants we've worked with, and I would always defer to them. We've worked with some fantastic people who look at these. We often talk about the industrial space as a biosphere, so it might have a tempered environment, which means it's not too hot or too cold. But it's not necessarily super warm or super chilled. It depends what. So the shed itself is kind of Cat A building, and the fit out is usually done by the tenant. So if they require super cold areas or super warm areas, they will do that internally. So you get box within a box. Again, Martin will know a lot more about that than me. But it's interesting that the operation will have its own requirements. And so when you design the industrial building, it has to be agile and flexible for now and the future. But certainly the whole net zero carbon is an absolute must, and we have to do that very quickly. Actually, we can't sort of just chat about it for much longer. So there are many different ways. Thanks for the question. It's extremely important, probably one of the most important. And I think co-location is a way of actually sharing some of those issues.
Martin, did you have anything to add to that, or shall we move on to the next question?
Just a couple of points. Thanks for that, Tom, as well. And so I think you've got, net zero is a broad church. Net zero in construction, net zero carbon in construction. If you are repurposing a building, then you've got a long way down that line. But if it's a new building, like you can see behind me, there are established ways of achieving that through reducing via design and then either offsetting or mitigating. Net zero in operation is a bit more interesting because co-location brings challenges that almost impact the way we would do that traditionally. Again, those that can see me can see some fantastic roof lights behind me. There's no lights in that building in a traditional warehouse before it's fitted out. And that goes a long way towards reducing the overall energy use. If you've got the industrial underneath a load of resi or another use, you've then got to find a way to either get light into that space or to introduce LED lighting. The other challenge potentially is one way to address your operational carbon is through renewables and traditionally PV, rooftop solar. And again, the smaller the building, the less space you might have for rooftop solar. So there are some challenges in there. They're not impossible to solve. We've got a really good understanding of how to deal with these things. Dealing specifically with what type of heating in there, I think Tom will probably agree with me. In the near future, the answer will be not gas. There will be electrical solutions, and they'll be driven more by actually the mixed use element rather than the industrial. Typically, an industrial space doesn't require a lot of heating, and generally that is only there to if you've got sprinklers to provide frost protection. And as you're into urban spaces and mixed use buildings, the general temperature environment is going to be such that that's less of an issue. So,
thank you. Just a note from Francis Mayer says that drone delivery also is already being used by health services for urgent medical needs in Southampton, Portsmouth, Isle of Wight. So it's all happening already. So now Dave Murphy is asking, what is the biggest challenge we face for last mile logistics in existing dense urban centres? Are we waiting for large-scale holistic redevelopment to become available? Equally, is there a role for micro consolidation centres to be a standard consideration for new medium to large schemes? So, Kat, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think probably the biggest challenge in dense urban centres is absolutely the transport impact, the impact it's going to have on the highways, how you get in and out of these places, and are they the right scale for the operator? And yes, I suppose it really depends who's moving in there. You do have these smaller operators, but yeah, if you're looking for, I'd be interested in Martin's answer as well, actually. But for large scale operators, yes, there probably is a need to wait for that holistic redevelopment and get all the uses back in together that require that town centre to function as it should, whilst placing last mile logistics in there. But I would say, yes, the biggest challenge at the moment that we can see is probably on the highway network and how that works.
Martin, did you want to come back on that?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, no problem.
I think it's opportunity. There's demand and there are properties out there, but it's matching the two together with the challenges, as Kat mentioned. Tom showed in his presentation a site that we looked at previously and undertook a lot of work on that, but it's matching the opportunity of potential occupiers with the facilities you've got. The questioner sort of hinted at one possible solution, which is assembling one or more smaller properties to give you the opportunity to then do these sorts of multi-story schemes that we've shown an example of and we've got experience of doing elsewhere.
And can I ask you whether you think that there is how do local communities respond when they're going to have a industrial logistics park, even if it's under a housing scheme in their backyard? Is this something you're seeing any kickback against, or?
Well, as I sort of said in my presentation, I think there are traditional perceptions of what a logistics scheme is, you know, and I've played to the stereotype here by showing a big empty shed, haven't I? People don't necessarily understand the complexity of what goes on inside and the quality of the jobs that are available, and it's a challenge that we sort of deal with every planning application through consultation and explaining what actually goes on and listening as well. As I said, our aim is to be a member of the community for a long time, and by doing that, by taking that approach, you can break down those barriers.
Very good. Now, just one final question. We're nearly up to time. So, have the panels seen increase in data centres coming forward, supplementing industrial proposals? Is it helpful to hear the panel's view on this, and if they view this as a new competing demand for SIL against warehousing logistics on these sites? Is that something anyone has come across?
So we do see tremendous desire for data centres. We're all using the internet more and more and more. The advent of working from home is seeing a demand for improved networks and the like. The key thing is power availability as opposed to space. So there is a healthy demand for data centres, but it's not usurping the more traditional uses.
Tom, you've unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Martin's answered on that, on the data centres. Actually, it's where the power is, so it's not always right in the middle of town because there's a lot of power demands already. But I think just coming back to a question about mobility or moving goods through a city, which is whether you can have smaller sessions, smaller places. The London is this huge infrastructural three-dimensional system, and we've got people moving through it very well, pretty well, with the tube system, and with the roads, and with bicycles and scooters and things. And the goods through the city needs the same kind of level of discussion, I think, because we relied on truck or cart and horse and then vehicles, and it hasn't got that infrastructure really like people movement has, but we keep on moving goods through a city. So there's two questions. One is, should we carry on doing that? Or if we are, how do we best do that? And that will answer the question, can you have a little space somewhere or not? It's part of a bigger question.
Yes, well, of course, interesting enough, when he was mayor, Boris Johnson did have plans for huge tunnels, didn't he, all the way under London. But when he became prime minister, he wanted to do them under the sea between Liverpool and Ireland, I think, wasn't it? Anyway, no, Isle of Man and Ireland, yes, instead. So I guess that's in the levelling up agenda, that's probably on the back burner these days. Any more infrastructure for London, I think we have to wait for a little bit on that. But anyway, thank you all very much for your contribution today. This really important aspect of the sort of changing face of London and the way cities work. And just in a moment, I'll say to the audience, there will be a little questionnaire coming up. It's very helpful for us if you can put some answers into that. It just makes sure that we're delivering the sort of programs that everybody wants. So that's very helpful if you could do that. But thank you very much to our panelists, and goodbye.